Well, this morning, it's morning here where I am. I am at Princeton University Library. My name is Eric White. I'm the Scheide Librarian and Associate University Librarian for Rare Books and Special Collections. And I'll just be fulfilling a host's role at the beginning and later on for questions. Again, we're being recorded, and interpretation in Arabic is available if you use the global button at the very bottom. This is a joint event of TIMA, the Islamic Manuscript Association, and Princeton University Library. And I'm very pleased to have you here today. And I will introduce today's speaker, Deborah Schlein. Dr. Schlein joined Princeton University as Near Eastern Studies librarian in 2020. She received her PhD degree in 2019 from Princeton University's Near Eastern Studies Department. There she wrote her dissertation on the history of Unani Tib in Mughal and colonial India, focusing on the production and use of Arabic and Persian medicinal manuscripts. Prior to joining Princeton University Library, Deborah was a provost postdoctoral librarian and fellow at New York University, and she is a senior fellow in the Andrew Mellon Society of Fellows in Critical Bibliography at the University of Virginia's Rare Books School. Today, she'll be speaking about Arabic manuscript collections in detail here at Princeton University, and introducing you to some of those collections and the manner in which they can be accessed and used. It's a great collection of about 16,000 texts in 12,000 volumes, and she'll tell you more about that great breadth of that collection, which spans from Arabic, Ottoman, Turkish, Persian, Malay, Javanese, Urdu, and other languages from the Islamic world. Deborah, are you set? Ready to begin?
I think I am set, Eric. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Eric, for that lovely introduction. And thank you also to Dalia and Nashar for inviting us to be here representing Princeton's collection of manuscripts from the Islamic world. I'd also like to thank Lynn Ransom at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies for suggesting that we do this virtual visit today. I've really been looking forward to this presentation. Before I officially begin, I want to take a minute to recognize that millions of people in Turkey and Syria have been affected by the earthquakes on February 6th, and then again this past Monday. I'm sure most of us are aware of this. I'm going to share in the chat 2 links to lists of charities in case people are so inclined and able to give. The first link that I will be sharing here is a list that was put together by Princeton students, largely as a part of ongoing community efforts. And then the second link is focusing on groups that donate to communities more often overlooked during disasters such as these. So this is the second link here. And then the next thing I will do is share my screen. So if you will give me a few seconds. Oh. I'll put it in the slideshow for everyone. Thanks, Eric. Okay, so I think the best place to start here for this presentation would be a brief description and history of our collections. As many of you may know, Princeton's Special Collections Department houses the largest collection of manuscripts in Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman Turkish in North America. And it also holds manuscripts in other languages written in the Islamic world. As Eric said, it comprises of over 16,000 titles within 10,000 volumes or so. And these holdings are one of our library's major attractions for researchers, for students, for scholars, and our hope moving forward also for the broader public community. And as I'm sure with other collections that have been presented in this virtual visit series, it's not difficult at all to see why this collection is such a big draw. The manuscripts in this collection come from all across the Islamic world. This includes the Middle East and North Africa, but also South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. Languages covered in this collection can be seen here, as well as their current numbers in our catalog. I share this with you with the caveat that we are updating our manuscript records, so at least for the materials from the Islamic world, these numbers will be changing in the vein of becoming more descriptive and making the manuscripts more easily accessible. As an aside, the manuscript that you see here might be familiar to you because Dalia was able to put together a beautiful flyer for us for this talk using the bird imagery on this folio from the Munas al-Ahrar. So you'll notice or be familiar with the top 4 birds are the doves that you see at the top of the flyer. And then in the middle is a peacock, a parrot, and a nightingale. And I actually recently saw this in the collection, so I thought it would be a really great example to start out with. Okay, so how did this material get here? If you'll allow me for a moment, I will borrow somewhat from our description of the collections on our digital Princeton University Library webpage for the manuscripts from the Islamic world. And I will get into how you can access the digital collection as well later on. So the collections owe their beginnings to the manuscripts collected and donated by Robert Garrett, Princeton class of 1897, who collected this material from 1900 to 1943. They continued to grow under the tenure of Eno Littman, librarian at Princeton of what was then called at the time the Oriental Collections. By 1965, the collections had become quite large due to the efforts made by Rudolf Mock, curator of the Near East collections from 1955 to 1977. Within the larger Islamic World Manuscripts collection, the Garrett collection accounts for approximately 2/3 of this group of manuscripts. Onto a different Garrett entirely, Professor Garrett Davidson, who is an assistant professor of Arabic and Muslim World Studies at the College of Charleston, recently published an article entitled "On the History of the Princeton University Library Collection of Islamic Manuscripts" that goes into great detail about how the library acquired these materials. I highly recommend this article if you're interested in learning more about the history of Princeton's collections. Essentially, Professor Davidson divides the collection into most of its sub-collections, including what you see here. So the Garrett collection with its sub-collections of Hutzma and Littman, these two I will come back to later on in the presentation. Wijeri, al-Barudi, 5th Unit, and Yehuda, about which Professor Davidson spends a majority of the article delving into Abraham Shalom Yehuda's acquisitions. There's also the new series, which is 1,626 manuscripts acquired between 1955 and 1982 under Rudolf Mock. The bulk of this collection, as Professor Davidson points out, is focused on areas not well represented in the Garrett collection, most notably Shi'i manuscripts on a wide range of subjects from the early period to the 20th century. The last series that you see here is the 3rd series, one which Professor Davidson didn't go into in his article, but it is much more recent. So the description I will give you now comes from our catalog. This collection, the 3rd series, consists of an open series of almost 400 Islamic manuscripts written in Arabic, Persian, Ottoman Turkish, and other languages of the Muslim world. Almost all are bound manuscripts dating from the 11th to the 20th centuries. The individual manuscripts in the 3rd series have been acquired, identified, and given shelf numbers since 1987 and constitute an ongoing supplement to the rich holdings of the Garrett collection, which is in effect considered to be the 1st series, where the new series is considered to be the 2nd series, and therefore they named this the 3rd series. So it's clear that the collections here have quite a lot, with manuscripts largely dating from the 12th to the 19th century, but most of them having been copied between the 17th and 19th centuries. In terms of subject representation, the diversity of topics is expectedly quite vast. You will find many manuscripts related to the religious sciences, the naqli, or transmitted and revealed knowledge. So Qurans, tafsir, hadith, Islamic jurisprudence or fiqh, prayers. There's another strength in our collections of poetry and literature. And though it's not the major focus of these collections, many rational or aqli sciences are well represented in the collections as well. Astronomy, astrology, cosmology, medicine, as you see here on the left, I put, because I am biased for my own research, I put one of our medical manuscript digitizations up here. Botany, zoology, to a lesser extent, mathematics and geometry, language, grammar, dictionaries, histories, philosophy, and others. I absolutely could go on. There are also works for religions other than Islam, materials and languages from other religious communities, effectively. So, for example, Christian Arabic prayers, Syriac treatises, Aramaic works, manuscripts in Hebrew, and two manuscripts in Pahlavi and Avestan as well. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is two things. One, we'll go over just a few highlights from the collection. And then for the remainder of the presentation, I will explain how we are making these collections more accessible and how you can access them. And I will start with the highlights just to give you a glimpse of some items that our researchers and students and I myself have found interesting in our collections. Many of our researchers, primarily our graduate students, but also visiting fellows and scholars who come to special collections for their research, are focusing more these days on paratextual notes and marginalia as sources of context for material, intellectual, and reception history of texts and manuscripts in the Islamic world. And I don't blame them, because that's what I did when I wrote my own dissertation. As many of you already know, these notes, whether they are ijazat or certificates, colophon information that would show scribal information, when the manuscript was copied, possibly where, or ownership notes and stamps, give clues as to where the manuscript was copied, read, and transmitted, as well as who received it. What you see before you is a Quran manuscript that was copied towards the end of the 17th century in the Muslim city-state of Harar in Ethiopia. From the very beginning, we see notes in this manuscript that give voice to its context. On the first page is a note that records Hassan bin Adojo's endowment of this Quran to his mother, Fatima Shashu, in Diu, which was the principal Portuguese port of Gujarat. When we look at the inscribed date at the end of the manuscript, which the image is not here, but it notes the year 1105 Hijri, which would be 1693 or 1694, though that note is not in the same hand as the text itself. Next week, one of our graduate students, Amal Ben Salim, will be presenting this and other African Arabic manuscripts in a public event for the wider Princeton community to open up more discussion about Arabic manuscripts written in Africa. I'm looking forward to learning more from her about what she's found about this manuscript and others. And for anyone who is in the Princeton or tri-state area, this is a public event. So we have an online registration that you can register for if you would like to come and attend. Another highlight item that I'm showing now is this wooden tablet that would have been used for learning the Alif Ba and surahs from the Quran. So this is a learning tool. On one side of the board, we have the Bismillah and the writing exercises for learning the Arabic alphabet. This is on the right-hand image. And on the other side of the board, we have the second half of Surah At-Takathur, and in the lower right-hand corner, what our catalog describes as a calligraphic motif. It's an interesting little drawing. This item is undated in our records, but I will say we do have others like it that date largely from the 1800s and are either located from Burkina Faso or more generally in the Maghreb. I wanted to highlight this because, you know, when we talk about manuscript collections, we of course think of manuscripts, which is wonderful, but I have been teaching with this item this past year, and what's really wonderful for students to see is not just here's a codex, here's a written item that people studied, but how they studied and how they learned. And so this is a really great example of a learning tool that we can use to start thinking about education when people were learning their Alif Ba. Okay, and then the last highlight I will show is, again, I'm a little biased. This is possibly my favorite manuscript in the collection. This is Arabic translations of 6 treatises by Galen, 6 medical treatises, which of course Galen's works would have originally been in Greek. You can see the illumination here on the first 2 pages. There is no illumination anywhere else on the manuscript, just these pages. The colophon, again, not here, but I can tell you that the colophon says that it was copied by Manushihr bin Maqsud in 1061 Hijri, which would have been 1651 in Shiraz. Also not seen here, though, if you look very closely, you can see this red on the back, is the envelope flap binding that is red, in case anyone is interested in bindings. I know there's a contingent of people who are interested in that kind of material culture, so I wanted to point that out. I am no binding specialist, so I couldn't tell you if this was original, but if I were to hazard a guess, I'd say it's not. Hopefully one day we can figure that out. There's also a page in this manuscript of ownership statements, the earlier of which says that the manuscript was owned in 1183 Hijri or 1769. And the second one states that the manuscript was owned in 1227 Hijri or 1812 in Isfahan. So what we have here is an Arabic translation of Galen's medical texts produced in Shiraz, but one that also continued to be held and owned in the Persianate world. So these 3 items were meant to give you a very small taste of the different items in our collections. I recognize I focused mainly on the Arabic material. This is the strength of the collection. Again, many languages from the Islamic world are represented, as you saw in a previous slide. What I will now do is focus the rest of the time for this presentation on how we're making our collections more accessible and how you can access them. And before I go to the next slide, a small word of warning. The next slide has a lot of text on it, so just be aware of that. I don't mean to scare you. All right, so our current project for the manuscripts of the Islamic World collection is a 3-year project. Up here, I've called it the Al-Madani Access Project, and you will see why in a minute. We officially started this project in 2021, and the goal is to take 2 sub-collections of manuscripts from the Garrett collection, the Hutzma and Littmann collections that I mentioned earlier, and work to make them more accessible. These comprise nearly 1,200 and 500 volumes, respectively, and we chose them because they constitute Princeton's holdings of the Al-Madani Library, which is a collection of manuscripts which was owned by the Madani scholar and bookseller Amin ibn Hassan al-Hulwani al-Madani al-Hanafi, who died in 1898. His prolific Arabic scholarly library was accumulated through his travels across the Arab world and during his years living in Cairo, which was the book capital of the region during his lifetime. The collection is largely comprised of mainly Arabic manuscripts, but also contains Persian and Ottoman Turkish ones. And I can tell you from experience going through each manuscript in these collections, there are manuscripts from Southeast Asia as well, in Malay, for example, in this collection. Very few, but there are a couple. We chose this collection because it offers a window into the intellectual world of a 19th century Arab collector and speaks more broadly to the history of manuscript collection in the Middle East. For those who are interested, other parts of the Al-Madani Library are now at Leiden University and the Staatsbibliothek in Berlin. So what are we doing to make these manuscripts more accessible? What you see in front of you, this long list of people, and I am sure I've missed someone because there's been so many people involved in this project, are all of those who are working to help make these manuscripts more accessible. So when we talk about accessibility, we're not just talking about digitization. It is an important part, but so is conservation and metadata augmentation, as well as a variety of other description and access enhancements. This project started unofficially in 2020, but officially in 2021. We spent that first year before 2021. I was working with the people who are listed here under the Near Eastern Studies Department, as well as the Special Collections and Public Services Group, particularly Emma Sarconi, Marina Restow, and Stephanie Lucier, to write an in-house proposal, because this is quite a large project for this institution, to make these manuscripts more accessible. The first official step after that proposal was accepted was conservation. So we did a conservation review starting in April 2020, and this ran through August 2022, which consisted of a survey of each and every one of the manuscripts in this collection, reminding you that this is about 1,675 manuscript volumes, 1,675 manuscripts, because some of the items are multi-volume. And I worked with my conservation colleagues who are listed here, Brenna Campbell, Mick Letourneau, and Melody Chen, to undertake this survey. So what did the survey entail? Obviously, I'm not a conservator. So from their point of view, they were looking at things like, what is the current physical state of the item? What kind of treatment does it need? Should we be treating it before digitization or after? I was there as the language and subject specialist. And so I was helping them note down if there were ownership notes, what kind of information was in the colophon, if that was there, and other things such as this. And currently, now that we've finished the survey as of last August, my colleagues in preservation and conservation are going through the various treatments. We divided them into before digitization and after digitization. And from there, they divided them into minor, moderate, and major treatments. And they are working on them right now. And I'm very grateful for the work that they've been doing on this, as I am with everyone who's been working on this project for the past 2 years. Another step of the project was catalog record augmentation. We actually managed, and we're very proud of this, we managed to rehire one of our retired catalogers, Joyce Bell, to augment the records for the manuscripts in the Hutzma and Littmann collections so that they are more searchable, more discoverable, and more usable for our researchers. And this process started also in fall 2021. And then, of course, for digitization, Princeton University Library has its own digital studio where they digitize materials and make them accessible through digitization. And the process for digitization started in October of 2021 and is ongoing, like conservation, like metadata augmentation. In addition to all of this, we're also working out how best to add structural metadata to make accessing the digitizations easier. So what I'm about to describe is a little more librarian speak, but I think it's useful for researchers and anyone really interested in these collections to learn about how we think about making materials more accessible, including with structural descriptive information, structural metadata. I want to show you what an end result of this whole process looks like. Once we have a manuscript that has an updated record, that has gone through necessary treatment and been digitized. And my hope is that when I click on this, it will take me directly there. Fantastic. All right. So what you see in front of you right now is a catalog record for an item in our collections. This is one of the Hutzma manuscripts. I know that because the call number ends in an H. That has gone through metadata augmentation, where we've updated the record to make it more accessible and useful. It's gone through any conservation it may have needed beforehand. Before digitization, it would have gone through that. If it needs it after, it will get it after digitization, and it has been digitized. So we'll start with the basic information up here. You have bibliographical information, your title, the fact that this is an Arabic manuscript, the date it was copied. If it has a place of copy, often the record will also show that here, and some physical information about it. We know that this item has been digitized because we have this link here, and more importantly and obviously, we have this image here, and I'll show you what the digitization looks like in a second. But first, I want to scroll down and show you what an augmented record might look like. This is the call number. Later on, I will explain how to access this material. But call numbers are important both for us at the library, because this is how the material is organized and can be called off the shelf for you when you want to look at, but also for you, if you're ever interested in citing one of these items, you need to also, in addition to the author and the title, you need to also cite the call number and the collection that it is located in. So when we scroll down the record, what we see is this details section, which I'm very grateful to Joyce, is quite long, has a lot of very helpful information. The first of which I think we'll start with is the summary note, which describes to you in a little more detail than just the title, what this item actually is. What is the subject? What does it cover? How does it cover it? In this case, poems. And then in the notes section, you have more physical information about the manuscript, its collation, its decoration, the layout. If there are any marginal notes and glosses, this is something that was really important to our researchers to know. So if the note that there were marginal notes wasn't already in the record, we were wanting, and we talked to Joyce about adding in information about marginal notes. Because as I said earlier, this is really becoming a very important line of research for manuscripts from the Islamic world, is this paratextual approach. It also has information on the colophon, which is very helpful. And then if you're interested in binding, there's a binding note. This is a majmua, so it has multiple texts, a collected volume. It has multiple texts, and the contents is something new that we're focusing on with Joyce as well, which is very useful. In addition to telling you what the texts are, it'll also say where they are in the manuscript. And then if there are any ownership notes, the provenance section will note that for you. When I scroll down, what you get is a digital viewer of the item. And this is open access. If you were to look up the title of this manuscript in our catalog online and you found it, you don't have to be affiliated with this institution to access this digitization. These are all open access. And what we're looking at right now is two different sorts of contents, and I'll explain these in a second, but let's get to a page that shows you. I'll do this actually for thumbnails. We'll start with this image so you can see that. Thumbnails and index. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about structural metadata. What is structural metadata? Well, we divide this into two sort of groups: the physical structure of the item, so the front cover, the folio numbers, the paste downs. I'm scrolling down to the bottom to just show you that at the back, we also have images of the spine, the head, the foredge, these things. The folio numbers end up being the most useful for our researchers, but of course we have people who are interested and want to see, the whole item. You don't just want the text, you want to know how the whole item is made, especially if you're more interested in the material history of the item as a whole. This is sort of the physical structure of the item. Then we have what we would call the logical structure. This focuses more on the text itself, what information is there in the text. In this case, we start with the title page, which is where I was at, and then two sections for the two different texts in the manuscript. This section starts with the very first page of the manuscript, and since it has a colophon, those who were working on the structural metadata added the colophon, which is really useful. If you want to see what the colophon says, you can go directly there. Without this information, you could, of course, find it on your own. You could page through, but this makes it easier for researchers to go directly to materials that are of interest to them, pages, items, information that might be of interest to them. Essentially, this makes it easier to navigate the digitized item. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we worked out this process, because to be very honest, this was also a new process for me, learning about structural metadata. So I worked with my colleagues, Joyce Bell and Kim Lehman. Kim is in the digital studio. She's our digital projects and IT manager, to learn how to input this kind of structural metadata. And Princeton and the digital studio, the library and the digital studio, work specifically with a platform called Figgy. So I sat there with Joyce and Kim and figured out and learned how to note where this data went. What do we consider a title page? What do we consider a colophon? And how do we input that into the Figgy platform? Now, I know what a title page and a colophon is in a manuscript, but this is somewhat more detailed and has a little extra information that I needed to learn when we were figuring out how this applied to structural metadata in Figgy. So I learned this process and then wrote a guidebook. And then we used the guidebook. This guidebook is specifically for structural metadata for our manuscripts from the Islamic world. So in these particular languages, Arabic, Persian, Ottoman Turkish, and such. And we hired graduate students last summer to input this data. We trained them and then they input the data, and we still have one of them, very intrepid, Salah Razavi. He has been working on this material since the summer. Graduate students are busy, so I'm very understanding that they have dissertations to write, but he, and also Stephanie Lucier, who I worked with when we wrote the proposal, did a lot of work last summer, and he has continued for the structural metadata. So as I said, you know, this is more technical, this is more library focused, but it's helpful, I think, to know how we are trying to make this material more accessible to our users. And particularly when we think about our researchers, structural metadata is really useful. One other thing we did, which may seem very small, but is actually really crucial for digitization, researcher access, and citation, is foliation. So when manuscripts didn't have folio numbers, you can see here this number 33, that's a folio number. We added them in. We had special people who were given special responsibilities to write in pencil very lightly on the corners, so they weren't messing with the text on the manuscript, the foliation numbers. The reason this is important is because it allows for citation of relevant folios. And if someone wants to see what a previous researcher saw in the manuscript, because that researcher was able to cite the specific folio, they will be able to go back to that folio cited and see it for themselves, as opposed to the researcher cited the manuscript and the call number and everything and the location, but couldn't cite necessarily the folio or counted it up themselves and cited a folio they thought it might be, but the next person to come along has to do the exact same process. So we wanted to make this easier. We put foliation into the manuscripts. We are nearing 2/3 of the way through this 3-year project. Many of the processes continue, the conservation, metadata augmentation, digitization, all of these are in process, as is adding the structural labels to the digitized manuscripts. And something we haven't started, but is a goal of mine, is to create a guide to the digitized collection of manuscripts from the Islamic world, which will cover how to access these materials online and how to access manuscripts that have not yet been digitized. And I think that's a really good segue into our next section of this presentation, which is access. So if you want to look at which of our manuscripts have been digitized, the easiest way to do that is to visit the digital Princeton University Library webpage for these collections. And I have that link here. And I can also put that link in the chat. Okay, so DPUL stands for Digital Princeton University Library. And our collection is the Manuscripts of the Islamic World collection. On the page, it describes the collection, some of which you'll find familiar because I quoted it at the beginning. And if you scroll down, you'll see collection highlights. So you'll see the Al-Madani Library, you'll see illuminated manuscripts. You can go in and find these materials. I'm going to click on Princeton's holdings of the Al-Madani Library first. We have a more in-depth description of the collection and then a list of each item, for which you can search here, but I will also show how to search manuscripts in our catalog elsewhere that may be easier. But if you're just interested in knowing, all right, well, what has been digitized? This is a great resource to go through. And I'm wondering if there's a, yeah, okay. You can go through it. If I click on one of these items, it will show you the viewer at the top. It's a nice viewer. And have that cataloging information, that catalog record information from before there as well. Just for grins, let me click on this record to show you. The record is at the bottom of that digitized page. This is familiar to you because I showed you a version of this previously. Again, this is a Hutzma manuscript because it has an H at the end. But I will go back. because in addition to that highlight icon for the Al-Madani collection, you may have seen, and I'm pointing this out here, this one, Princeton Manuscript Collection Checklists and Catalogs, and this is specifically for our Islamic World Manuscripts collection. For anyone interested, I obviously like this manuscript very much. This is actually from the backside of the manuscript with the birds that are on the flyer. It has these lovely fruit trees on it, which is really nice. So when you click on this, what you will get is digitized checklists, inventories, catalogs of the collections, of the manuscripts from our broader manuscript from the Islamic World collections. We have a note here that one of them has not yet been digitized. The reason I'm showing this to you, first, it's a question of access. We want to make sure that you have access to these resources when you're trying to figure out if we have certain manuscripts of interest or not. Many of these catalogs, including ones that I think are not on this list, and this list may need to be updated, many of these catalogs were published decades ago. And when they were published, certain number systems were added to each item to tell you, okay, this manuscript of Ibn Sina's Qanun is number 462. But those numbers don't necessarily match up to the call numbers in our catalog. So that can make things difficult sometimes when you're looking at material. My suggestion when you are trying to figure out what manuscripts you have is certainly, as many of our researchers do, you are welcome to start with the physical catalogs, as long as you understand that those numbers won't necessarily match up to what's in our online catalog. When you're searching our online catalog, I always suggest that if you know the title, the author, even a place where you're trying to find manuscripts from a particular place, that you search that name, those proper nouns, in script. So if it's in Arabic, search it in Arabic script, and also in transliteration. And I'll show you what I mean by that. The reason I am suggesting this, let me backtrack. This is our Princeton Library webpage, library.princeton.edu. I can also put that in the chat. And if I want to find manuscripts, the way I would do that is from the library webpage, I would click on catalog here. And you'll notice on the side, these facets, these limiters. Click manuscript, it'll narrow it down immediately to just the manuscripts in our collection. And for the purposes of this presentation, we will narrow it down to the Arabic manuscripts. That number is probably different from what I quoted you because the numbers change as we update the records. The reason I am saying you should look up the material in both transliteration and script is because if I look it up in script, let's say I'm looking up Qanun, I mean Ibn Sina's Qanun, but I'm going to be very general. You'll get 15 items for this search in Arabic script when it's narrowed down to manuscript and language. 15, remember that number. If I search this in transliteration, instead of 15, you will get 50. Now, this doesn't mean that you should always search in transliteration and never in script. This is I don't want to say a relic, an after effect of the history of how material has been cataloged in our collections. Some items will have both script and transliteration in their records. Some will only have script and some will only have transliteration. So I always suggest when you're looking up that title of the text and you want to see the manuscript or that author or even a place, always do it both ways so that you are ensuring that you get access to as many of our resources as possible in our catalog. Let's click on I think the exact same manuscript I showed earlier in one of my slides, the Mujiz by Ibn Nafis. This one, as we can see, it doesn't have an image here that it's been digitized. There's no link. Just in case, I can check the bottom. There's no viewer down here. So if I wanted to see this manuscript, what I would do is I would have to see it in person, right? Because it's not digitized. I will repeat this possibly multiple times. Princeton's special collections and the library is not just open to Princeton researchers. It is open to anyone. If you are interested in looking at this material, you can create an account and request the material, and I'm about to show you how to do that. We want you to come here. We want you to look at this material. It is meant to be researched. It is meant to be looked at. We want you here. So to request this item, let's say you decide to come to visit Princeton University Library because you want to look at this copy of Ibn al-Nafis's Mujis and a couple of other copies of Najib ad-Din Samarkandi's Al-Asbab wal-Alamat, which is what I wrote my dissertation on. We have a copy or two of that as well. So you want to request this item. The way to do that is you click on Reading Room Request. And my computer is thinking, so bear with us. It's going to take you to this page asking you to sign in. If you are a Princeton researcher, you use your Princeton login. If you are not a Princeton researcher, it will ask you to create an account, and this is the link to do that. You will read all of this information that gives you info on access, the collections, digitization, all of this very useful information, and scroll down, accept the rules and regulations, and then you will create your account. I'm going to go back because I have an account already. When you log in with your account, what you will see is the page with all of the relevant information for the item that you would like to request. So it's filled in the call number, it's filled in the title, other relevant information, and then you just, you submit your request. I suggest you don't submit your requests until you know that you will be coming to Princeton to look at materials. So you can do your research, you can see that we have certain manuscripts that you want to see, plan your trip, and then as it gets closer to your trip, request that material, because those requests will now be in your account. And when you arrive, our colleagues in public services and who work in the reading room will be able to get those manuscripts for you to take a look at. I'm going to go back to my slide and explain our last slide, which is, again, questions of access. And I can also put these links in the chat. So if you want to learn more about how to access special collections in terms of visiting, what does that take? We have an access services page, a link for which I'm putting in the chat right now. The access services page has information on how to find materials, and what will be very helpful, information on reading room guidelines. So I'm just going to click this one and share that link with you now. The reading room being where you would look at the material that you have requested. When you scroll down, you'll see that the first thing you should do is register. So this also sends you to the page to register for an account. And then it tells you other information about reading room guidelines and access and what you need to know, care and handling, other such things. If you have questions specifically for special collections about a general collection or access, we do have what my special collections colleagues call an Ask Us form, where you can input your question. It will ask you for your name and your email, whether you're associated with the Princeton community, and then you can ask your question. If it's about a specific item, maybe a digitization, make sure to include the catalog URL as well as the call number of the item. Again, this is the catalog URL. This would be the call number of the item. That helps them, that helps them, my colleagues in special collections, to know what manuscript you're talking about. Please understand that they are getting a lot of questions right now. So they do have this note that you may not hear back from them until at least 7 to 10 business days. But they are there to answer questions about special collections. If you have a question specifically about, Arabic manuscripts or a particular title in our manuscripts collection, you are welcome to email me. My email address, typing it in now, is dschlein@princeton.edu. So the first initial of my first name and then my last name. I think, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Since Eric is here as our special collections representative, forgive me, he is also able to answer any questions related to special collections, or add anything I missed, Eric, about access to special collections. But I
think you covered it very well. Thank you for that. I can see already in the Q&A, we have 6 questions remaining. There have been a couple in there that may have been answered just
Sure.
by, some quick typing. And these were particular, but there are 6 questions that remain, I think, kind of universal questions that I'm sure you'll like to ask. Can you see them, Deborah? Do you want to
yes,
go?
I can.
Okay, I think
can
you can, yeah.
Read them out loud if you would like
Sure.
me to. The first question we have is asking, so it says, I want to ask if the library has illuminated manuscripts about animals, birds, or hunt in Islamic civilization. This is a really good question. If I'm just going to share my screen again, if that's okay. What I'm going to do now is actually go back to the digital Princeton University Library webpage and show you, I'm going to minimize that, and show you, okay, so you get to see behind the scenes a little bit. One of the highlights that I skipped over down at the bottom of that page is the illuminated manuscripts section. Now, digitization of these materials is ongoing. My deep hope is that we can, once we finish this project, we can do another one, because our collection is 12,000 volumes strong, 16,000 texts, and the project that we're working on right now is 1,675 manuscripts. So that is about a tenth, a little more than a tenth of the collection. But if you are interested in looking at material from the hunt or something like that, you can certainly look through the illuminated manuscripts highlight. One other thing that I would suggest is actually, again, going to our catalog. I'm going to go through the motions again because this isn't intuitive, so I think it's important to explain. Let's say I'm interested in Persian manuscripts. So what I've done here is, on the left-hand side, I first chose manuscript under format, and now I'm going to choose Persian. See, that number is different from before. I'm going to choose Persian as the language to narrow it down. I know you said illuminated, but what I would start with is, say, just a general subject that should come up. And if you want to see what's been digitized, under access, you have what's available online. So this is actually another one I presented recently. Oh, yeah, this will work. So this is a Persian manuscript from the 13th century. When you scroll down to the bottom, Manafi al-Haywan, when you scroll down to the bottom, you get, hey buds, you get 2 crows sitting on a rock in front of what's described in our catalog as a fruiting tree. I think it's more abstract than obviously representative, but those, you can search by general subject, but those facets on the left-hand side that I was showing you are going to be very helpful for narrowing down topics of interest. You absolutely can put in illuminated if you want, but there are different ways that paintings in our manuscripts are described. So I actually suggest searching by the subject that you're interested first before you put in illuminated. Okay, the next question I see is, do you ever categorize the subject more specifically than just Arabic Islamic manuscripts, categorization by subject, so poetry or tafsir or fatwa? Are there Dewey Decimal style standardizations for such categorization in existence? Okay, so I will start by saying that I am not a cataloger. So if anyone on this call is a cataloger and wants to put in information about Dewey Decimal standardizations for these kinds of categorizations, I am sure they exist. I should not be answering that question because I'm not a specialist. However, that, let's see if I can find one. That subject that you saw, manuscripts, yeah. So here's one, manuscripts, Persian, New Jersey. This is a holdover of how the material was previously cataloged. let's see if I can give you the one that Joyce updated. We are trying to stay away from that kind of, come here, you. We're trying to stay away. We all have our faults, it's fine. We're trying to stay away from that kind of categorization. And so the example I'm putting back in is one that Joyce has worked on. Oh, well, forgive me, we're in the process of working on it. Many of the subjects you'll see here, it gives information about what's contained in their headpieces. Unfortunately, most of our manuscripts, should I say most? Many of our manuscripts do have this heading. This can actually be something I can talk to Joyce about in future. We have another meeting coming up. We should have better subject headings for these materials. I think, as I said, this is a holdover of how the material was cataloged previously. It's always a learning experience.
I think I can add that, I think, this is Eric again, I think we can add that we're not using a Dewey system to do this work in our records. And something like poetry will show up in many, but perhaps not all. That has yet to be made uniform.
Thank you. And I would add to that, again, not a cataloging specialist, but we don't actually use a Dewey system. We use a Library of Congress system for systems of standardization for our items. I recognize that that's not what the question was asking, but I gave you one example that wasn't very helpful, but there certainly are records that have, this is poetry or this is tafsir in the record. It may not necessarily be in the Library of Congress subject heading, but if you noticed when you can see all the questions, can't you? When I put in that search term, say animals, I didn't say specifically subject. I just said keyword, because that way it captures everything in the record as opposed to just the specific subject. So I highly suggest anyone searching that way uses general keyword as opposed to the subject itself. We have a question asking to see Quranic manuscripts. I can do that. Okay, so we'll just go back to the catalog. I'm gonna just stick with what's online so that we can see some of these examples. With a reminder that the first highlight that I gave is a Quran itself. The Quran from Ethiopia is not yet digitized, but this is one of the examples. So if I put in manuscript, and I will narrow down to Arabic here and type in Quran. And again, this is wanting to see what's available online specifically. Oh, I'm teaching with this one in a couple of weeks. Let's do this one. So this is a Quranic manuscript that was, there's a question here, that was likely produced in Iran between the 1500s and the 1600s. It has been digitized and has quite a lot of information. Here's a good example of the subject, and I'll come back to Qurans in a second. So it does have this manuscript, Arabic, New Jersey in it, but there is information on, there's a waqf in here. So the person added into this that there is an endowment statement of some kind in this manuscript and used it in subjects. The waqf should also be described. Yep, here it is in the provenance section. So this has been digitized. I'm going to go to thumbnails. This is an older digitization, so I apologize for the darker colors. I teach with this one a lot, actually, as an Iranian example of a Quran. You can go in and zoom in. You're supposed to be able to zoom in. There we go. The first few pages very obviously give you information and beginnings. I'm just going to quickly go through this because I recognize we have a lot of questions. This is an older digitization, so again, I apologize. But the fact is, this is available online if you'd like to search. Here we have a starting point with the various medallions, which is very helpful. It's a really beautiful Quran if anyone ever wants to come and visit and see this item. But the search can be done by narrowing down by manuscript and then to find what's available online, doing the access under there, and I narrowed it down to Arabic. The banner of the meeting. Okay. The banner of the meeting in the flyer. Yeah, I'm going to assume that's what you mean. So that is a copy. I'm just going to start over and narrow it down to manuscripts of the Munis al-Ahrar, which is, which is a book of riddles, illuminated leaf. So it's not a full manuscript, but I can show you what it looks like in our catalog. I'm going to scroll down to the viewer. And this is the front page that has those fruit trees. And this is the back page that has the birds. And that's where the images came from for the flyer. Are these manuscripts available for free? So I'm going to assume that the question is asking, can you access them online freely? And the answer to that, if they are digitized, is yes. So you do not have to be affiliated with Princeton to be able to access these resources. You can simply go again to the library.princeton.edu webpage. And then from there, the catalog.
Deborah, we have about 2 minutes left. And
yeah, I'll stop with this one. Thank you, Eric.
No, it's fine. But I think there are some good questions. For instance, are the images in these things IIIF compatible? And they are, if it's digitized by us.
Thank you, Eric.
IIF. And some nice comments for you there. And I'm just scanning the questions very quickly to give you some breath here.
If the material is digitized and available online, it is free.
Yes. Yeah.
So you don't have to pay for it.
Correct. And we do not print off and send you a manuscript facsimile, but you can download a complete PDF of what you see.
I think what I will do is end with a question where the person is asking, could you touch briefly on possibilities for duplication requests of manuscripts that have not yet been digitized? So that in the chat, I put in this access Ask Us link, which I will highlight, this one right here. If you would like to get a digitization of a manuscript, what happens is you go to that Ask Us link, you put in the information, the call number, the catalog record, asking if the item can be digitized. They have a backlog, but if it's out of copyright, which most of the materials in our manuscripts from the Islamic World collection are, it will be put on the list. And once it is digitized, it is made publicly accessible, and you should be emailed about that as well. I think that would be a good place to stop, Eric.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. And Tima and Princeton University, thank you for this. We got great questions, some nice comments, both in the chat and the questions. Any last words, Deborah?
No, I think, well, maybe yes. As I said before, these materials are meant to be accessed by you. So if you can make it here, or if you want to look at what's available online, we are open. So please come, please visit, please look at what's available online. We welcome you.
That's great. Thank you all for attending today. Best wishes.
Thank you.